fossils. Fossils are very exciting to talk about because they give us a glimpse of what was before, like organisms and their lives, of what existed before us. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this part of our relative dating part of our lecture. Okay, so fossils is simply defined in our lecture as preserved remains or traces of organisms. So quite simple, but I think it's fine since you have a basic idea of what fossils are. So usually when we say fossils, these are organisms which has been preserved, so dead organisms or parts of the organisms has been preserved, and not just by any time period, like prehistoric. So before humans had started to write down history, then whatever was preserved before our time is easily identified as fossils. So even before our age, for example, before the age of human beings, those would be considered as fossils. So that's a rough definition since a lot of items can be considered as fossils. For example, human fossils and so forth. But um, a safe standard would be organisms which died prehistoric, right, and preserved will be considered as fossils. Now, not only the organisms themselves, but also traces of the organism. So, whatever they left behind. So, for example, footprints, poop, hunting nests, scratches on rock surfaces, and so forth, those will still be considered as fossils. They are important for the determination of the possible age of formation of sedimentary rocks. So, as you have recalled in our previous discussions, that all fossils are located within sedimentary rocks. And if you want to identify the age of formation of sedimentary rocks, you may rely on fossils present therein in order to pinpoint from when did these rock layers form. Okay, so in order for fossilization to happen, some conditions must be met. So some conditions are required to permit fossilization or preservation of the remains of an organism. And these are our conditions. So first, rapid burial. When it comes to death of organisms, it's not common. It's not commonplace for organisms to be quickly covered. Like for human beings, it's part of our rituals, of our customs. But for other organisms, pretty much wherever you die, that's where your burial place is. So sometimes because they are at the open air, or most cases since they are at the open air, oxygen will contribute in the faster decay of those organisms. But if oxygen is completely devoid in one location, and that may be created by rapid burial, then that could create a fossil. Next, protective cover or medium. So, protective cover or medium that will prevent the decay of certain organisms. Okay, so will prevent air and moisture from build-up. Next, possession of hard part or durable tissues. So it's not a coincidence that bones, teeth, and shells are often the subject of fossilization because these are easily preserved since they are made up of hard parts or like resilient tissues. Then that's the reason why they can be easily preserved. So sadly, organisms which were made by like really fleshy material, which is like early Cambrian, so early Cambrian organisms were very difficult to like naturally preserve because they were made up of soft tissue. Same goes with plants. So plants, leaves, shrubs, or flowers are very difficult to fossilize because of their soft nature. Okay, so but if we're lucky, we can find organisms with preservation without alteration. So there are certain amazing coincidences that happen when organisms, because of these three possible scenarios, will preserve an organism without changing anything about its molecular structure. So, for example, this sad insect, this unfortunate insect, which ended by getting trapped in tree sap. So tree sap is also called amber. So this is the tree sap which eventually solidifies and can be found and easily preserved. So whatever was trapped in the tree sap can be preserved as well. So we have here a prehistoric insect preserved because it died by getting trapped in amber. So this is preservation without alteration. So you can easily see that just by looking at the creature that it's still the same physical structure and most likely the same molecular structure as well. So in this scenario, since this insect was covered in hair protective cover or medium, okay, it was preserved. Okay, so I will be showing two different pictures, but it's quite morbid. So if you are quite squeamish, you could forward the lecture and just skip this part. But if you're staying, then good. I have a question. Are mummies considered as fossils? So they're dead human beings and they've been preserved. But you might be thinking Egyptians. But Egyptians is just one type of mummy. So at least humans mummifying other human beings. But how about natural mummies? If your answer is yes, that's still correct. There are actually different types of fossilization. There is natural and artificial. So um, natural fossilization happens normally in the environment, while for the artificial, it's man-made. Okay, so the Egyptian type of mummification is artificial fossilization. So that's still considered as fossils. But there are natural mummies. So natural mummies which just by coincidence they were preserved. So one good example is this young girl, the final moments of the Incan child mummy's lives revealed. So this is an article from an article by Live Science. So if you explore this article, it will tell you the story that this Incan child was chosen by the Incan village. So the Inca, as you know, are very religious and they are pagan worshippers. And in line with that, they also believe in human sacrifices. So aside from being this girl is a human sacrifice, and she's considered lucky, blessed even because she's beautiful. She's one of the most beautiful girls in her village. Therefore, she is worthy of living with the gods. Unfortunately, the gods live in on the top of the mountains of the Himalayas. So what the elders would do is bring a child, like a voted child from the village to live with the gods by bringing them to the mountains and just leaving them there. So you can see that the infant child probably died of hypothermia and just slept and she never woke up. But since she slept or died in the Himalayas, her body was perfectly preserved by ice. So her skin may be off color, but she's still intact. So this is an example of preservation without alteration. Okay. Another example with some changes. So this man is called the Bogman. So the Bogman is quite eerie, famous but eerie because of his facial expression. Because he looks like he's just sleeping, like even peacefully sleeping. So the Bogman has body has been thrown in a bog. So if you're not familiar what a bog is, it's a swamp with thick waters. So because of that, it's actually devoid of gases, no oxygen within the water, and that's a place where they threw bodies. So medieval people, I'm not even sure much of the time period, but um, they threw bodies. So the people back then, they threw bodies into the bog, and those bodies have been preserved because of the lack of oxygen in the water. So that's the Bugman. So the Bugman is just one of them, because as you can see, the title of the article is Bug Bodies. So that bug is actually like a place where people would usually throw bodies in. So just one example of preservation without alteration in terms of human form. Okay, so without alteration, it's all done, but there are also preservation with alteration. So in this case, there will be some molecular or chemical changes in the composition of the organism. And we have three types. We have petrification, recrystallization, and carbonization. So when we say petrification, so as the term petrify means to turn into stone. That's why the Harry Potter spell, petrify. So, petrification, what happens here is the materials within the organisms themselves will be replaced by rocky materials, so like silicates. Okay, so for example, here we have your starfish, but this starfish was petrified because now it's now full of silicates, so which is a normal component of rocks. Okay, so because of the porous material within, it now became petrified. Okay, so this is also petrified wood. So petrified wood is a very common fossil because, of course, in history, trees have been long present before human beings, and even I think dinosaurs, even before the time of the dinosaurs, trees have been present. So naturally, more of them will be preserved. So this is a type of petrified wood. Like the shape would still be, looks like wood. Sorry, there is still some coloration of wood there, but if you analyze the material, it has now changed because it has rock materials or rock minerals in its tissues. Okay, so that's the first one, petrification. Next, we have recrystallization. So when we say recrystallization, these are changes in the calcium carbonate present in the organism itself. So for example, if the organism has the mineral aragonite within its shell, that's unstable, so eventually it will decay into a more stable polymorph called calcite. So the aragonite will change to calcite, which only leads to the further preservation of the shell. Okay. So this picture, by the way, is something I took myself. I took this picture myself from the Museum of National History in Manila. So they displayed some fossilized, yeah, some fossils. And this is a fossil of an ammonite mollusk. Okay. So what did the organism look like? It looked like this. Okay. Um, so this picture is the inside. So imagine this being preserved, but you cut it in half. That's why you can see inside the polished pattern of the fossil. So very beautiful. Next, we have carbonization. So carbonization is common in plants, of course, because plants have very high carbon within their tissues. So this is the one of the ways soft tissues of plants can be preserved. So if you can imagine, it's like carbon paper. So carbon paper being left, the mark of carbon paper being left on rocks and rock layers. Okay, so you have black films embedded in our sediments. So here you can see prehistoric ferns being preserved in this piece of rock. Okay, so that's three organisms, ways on how organisms can be preserved with alteration. Now there is another type of fossil which is called the ichnofossils or trace fossils. So these are not the organisms themselves, not a part of the organism, or not part of their bodies, but a trace of whatever they left behind. So technofossils are not the usual body fossils, but traces of the organism itself. So these include molds, so footprints, that's also included, casts, so the shape of their bodies left on the preserved mud or volcanic mud, burrows, so homes that they may have made for themselves, coprolites, so coprolites are fossilized excrement or poop. So, and those are very interesting because once you find a fossilized coprolite, you can try to identify what type of diet those organisms had before, and what are the other organisms they thrived on, and other things about their health, their environment, so forth. And then finally, gastroliths. So gastroliths are polished stones ingested by organisms for digestion. So I think I have mentioned this before. Like for example, birds have bad digestion. That's why they need to swallow small stones in order to help with their digestion. So eventually, of course, they will poop that out, or when they die, the gastroliths will be preserved, if even if their body was not. Okay, so that's all the preservation with alteration discussed, and we have also discussed ichnofossils. So test yourself. Let's see if you can identify what are the types of preservation shown in this picture, or if they are ichnofossils. Okay, so look at this picture. At a first glance, you might guess that, this is footprints. Well, it's not. Unfortunately, yeah, it's not a type of fossil though. But you will see that there's a mark here. And those are actually different types of organisms. Those are the shape of the organisms themselves. So these are type of soft-bodied creatures that live during the early Cambrian. That's why they don't have shells yet. But you can see they left the shape of their bodies on the rock surface. So this is a type of ichno-fossil. Okay, so I think this is quite easy to identify. It looks like tracks, motorcycle tracks, or snake tracks. So you can easily identify this as an ichno-fossil. But the next question is, what type of organism would actually form these markings? And it's the Arthropleura. So the Arthropleura is an extinct millipede arthropod that lived during the Carboniferous period until the Permian period. So, they died during the Permian extinction event. So I'm quite thankful that they didn't survive that extinction event because I don't want to meet that personally. Okay, so next. Okay, so this is quite easy. Petrification. So this is petrified log. And last example, I think. So this is recrystallization of another ammonite mollusk.